Good evening all, and welcome. I'd like to give a huge thank you to all of my very generous patrons who help keep the channel running by donating on Patreon. Today's Patreon star is Emily Wyan. Thank you so much for your support. If you're already a patron, I am actually giving away promotional copies of the audiobook I did mid last year. So, if you'd like a free copy, feel free to sign up and be sure to email me to receive it. All the info is already on Patreon. And if you're not a patron yet and you would like to, you can do that. But you have to get in there quick. There are only 25 and 4 have already been taken. So, get in there quickly. Finally, the competition has come to a close and the voting is available on the community tab. Some of you may have already voted, and if you'd still like to vote, it's still there. The winner will be announced tomorrow. But anyway, for now guys, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened a few years ago in high school. I was slim and pretty tall. The fight is in the spirit, and not the muscle in my case, and could probably be absolutely flattened in a fight, but will never admit that fully. One day at lunchtime, a random student, who we will call Weirdbeard, came up to me and sat down without saying much. I, being a bit of a loner, was open to the company and listened to him talk about his life. He was a massive dude, a head taller and twice as broad, and a bit neck-beardy. He spoke in a really flat, monotone voice, with zero inflection. In our first conversation, he talked about how he never slept, and I offered some tips, also finding it hard to sleep. He kind of brushed it off, like he didn't actually want to solve anything, or talk about it fully. He instantly moved on to the topic of self-harm, and brandished his forearms, covered in some thin cuts. He pulled out a razor and was sort of like, "Yeah, that's my buddy here," waving the razor around. I take self-harm seriously, and was genuinely concerned for this guy. I asked him if he had anyone to talk to about it, and from memory his response was sort of like, "Psychs are useless. They don't know anything. I don't have anyone to talk to who cares." So I felt awful for him, and would check up on him every now and again, although I barely had to try, because he'd always find me somehow and walk along me or creep up behind me. This whole thing was a slow burn, and took a long time to escalate. But alas, let's continue into stage 2. So, we hung out a few times. He found out where I was sitting at lunch, and he asked for my number. I thought, oh well, what's the worst that could happen? He started messaging me a lot. It started pretty general, but then he messaged me that he liked me. I scrunched up my nose and sent the "sorry, not interested" message that made me feel like a dick. But clearly unfazed, he continued asking me and would say things like, "I dreamt about you last night. We slept together." I often said, "I'm not looking for a relationship," but eventually moved on to saying that "you're just not my type," which caused him to ask, "Why though? What's your type?" He suggested we go shopping together, for me to choose clothing I'd like for him and a haircut I'd like for him, as if that would magically make him my type. Random, but I noticed him getting a bit experimental with his hair and shaving in some really cringe looking lightning bolts. I think he expected me to jump all over him with his new face acquisition. He started bringing up the self-harm again and again, saying that he felt that if we were in a relationship, that he'd be able to cope with his depression better. He would lash out at me and call me all kinds of horrible things for not wanting him to be happy, and would 180 from these angry rages to over-the-top apologies, and the classic, "Are we good now?" At school, he passed me a razor blade and said, "Keep this." I think he'd used it to cut himself, and couldn't tell what he was implying. Perhaps for me to do the same. It was a sort of, "in case you need it," gesture. In my off classes, I would study in the library, and he started to figure that out. He would walk up and just drawl, "Hey." I eventually stopped looking up, and he'd just start kicking my leg until I did. Even when I said that I was busy, he'd just say, "Geez, can I at least sit here?" I'd sort of shrug, and he'd take that as a hell yes. Once he came to me with the shops, and almost got us kicked out because the shop security saw him and didn't trust me by association. Weirdbeard laughed it off, and said that the police knew him by name, as if this was something to be proud of. He tried to walk me home a few times, and I would keep telling him that I was fine. He didn't take no for an answer, and walked me all the way to my house, even though I repeatedly asked him, "Don't you have anywhere else to go?" as a way of softly rejecting him. I went on holiday at some point, and used it as a chance to tell him that I'm going to be out of reception and wouldn't be able to talk. Because whenever I usually told him I was busy, he'd just say, "Stop ignoring me, bitch. What's your problem?" sort of thing. I thought, my God, surely he'd accept this. I run into a patch of reception after one day, and I have 22 missed calls. No more needs to be said there. Just, wow. Okay. Now here's when things ramp up to creepy factor. Let's call this stage 3. He follows me out of class one day and asks me where I'm going. I tell him I'm heading out for a walk around the town, and he walks after me and I say, "Oh, aren't you busy now?" He says, "Nah," and keeps walking. We're all alone at the back of the school, and part of me felt too scared and too tired to turn this giant man away. He talked about erratic fits of anger, and out of nowhere he punched a fence, causing his knuckles to bleed. I was like, "Whoa, man, you should probably see someone about that." He laughed and said that he did it all the time and not to worry, and that sometimes he just has to punch things. I laugh it off and keep walking. We walk past a family walking their dog, and Weirdbeard stiffens next to me and just stops walking. He then says after the family passes, "I killed the dog once. It was running along without its owner. Stupid owner left the leash. It jumped on me, and I stamped its spine in half." Internally, I was in shock and didn't know what to say, feeling increasingly more uncomfortable. Externally, I did the whole, "Ha, yeah, right," not wanting to show this dude that I was scared or concerned in any way. He didn't laugh. He just looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I hate dogs." Then he tells me about how he likes to kill animals when he's angry, to help him relieve the anger, and that it's the safest way for him to contain himself. I assume this means instead of hurting people. He said he'd use a stick sometimes to mix things up. I was completely alone with Weirdbeard at this point, and I turned around deciding that the walk was over. After that, I made excuses to avoid him as much as possible, and I'd get angry messages saying, "I know what you're doing. No more excuses. Stop ignoring me. At least do it with me. Just give me a chance. I would never hurt you." On my birthday, he hand makes something quite big. I say I can't accept it, and he says, "I'll teach you how to use it after class." When I still refuse, he dumps it at my feet and walks off. And now we have the finale. I message him that I wanted to end our friendship, and that I was tired of him asking me out. We arranged a place to meet at school, and we met there alone. I felt like this wasn't a great idea, but people were starting to spread the word that him and I were together, and I just hated being seen with him on my shoulder at school. I met him, and he looked ready to pounce or something. The tension was tangible, and I tell him that I'm unsure about remaining friends, and he gets upset. I'm a good guy. How can't you see that? I treat you so well, I dream about you all the time. At least let me sleep with you, at least give me that. He starts shaking. I deserve this. You're the only person I'd ever want. If I can't have you, I don't want to be here. And he starts talking about killing himself, and saying, so that's it, you just want me to stand here and watch me die? He's shaking a lot, and I'm not sure where this is going. I tell him that I'm dating someone else anyway, and he actually starts crying angrily. He talks about how he's been abused, and how I'm emotionally abusing him, and how he loves me, but I can be such a dick. This goes on for hours. He then gets quiet and gives me this death stare. I back away and say, I have to go. Please don't do anything stupid to yourself. And I leave. He sends me a text minutes later saying, I wasn't going to do anything to myself. You're lucky, actually. I was seconds away from hurting you. I could have snapped your bones. Then he calls me, breathing into the phone, finally saying that he slit his own throat, and starts shouting at me. How am I going to explain this to my parents? Look what you made me do. I'm covered in blood. He sends me multiple messages threatening to ruin my life, and makes me go through hell, as well as threatening to kill himself, and that I'd have to live with practically murdering him. Note, until this point I'd only talked with one other person about this guy, and she didn't seem worried and brushed off the topic, so I hadn't brought it up with my parents. That's when I decided to speak with my parents. We contacted the school, and we considered contracting the police or some sort of emergency service that night, because he kept messaging me about the horrible things he was apparently doing to himself. I told my parents I thought he might be bluffing, because he'd done this sort of thing before. He just hadn't ever threatened my safety before, as he was starting to do so now. Sure enough, his neck was fine, his arms were fine, and he was perfectly fine the following days. He hadn't done anything to himself, and I was glad he was okay, but angry to fully realize what a manipulative asshole he was. The closing chapter of this whole ordeal was him sending me more messages threatening to ruin my life. He walked up behind me and spat on me, whispering, "Bitch," into my ear. I blocked him on my phone. He messaged me ages later on Facebook, which we'd never talked on, to apologize for everything and say he'd changed so much. I said I was happy for him, but he still kind of asked to meet up, and for me to give him another chance, and to see how good and successful he was now. His massive paragraph was half a humble brag and half a plead. I said, yeah, no, and blocked him on every single platform. I gave this guy the benefit of the doubt for a long time, even in retrospect. I could never fully tell whether he were bluffing about things, like the violence or being cruel to animals, as he went into a lot of detail. But at the time, I saw it as a more violent fantasy of his. I felt a lot of guilt around rejecting him. He had a really messed up life, and he told me every single detail of it. So even though I never thought his actions were justified, it still made sense in some way that he'd have strange coping mechanisms and issues. My parents were really good about everything. Once they found out what was going on, they made sure I wasn't walking home alone at all, and we talked to the school about giving this dude extra psychological support with the school counselors, although I'm sure he needed more than that. It took me a long time to realize his coincidental appearances, wherever I would be, are considered a form of stalking. I'm happy to say I never got to meet this guy again, and I hope that he's sorting his issues out and he hasn't tried to manipulate other girls. I was selling my old car, as I had brought a new one. I posted it on a couple of selling sites and Facebook. I arranged 2 visits that day and was home alone. It was broad daylight, and so I assumed everything would be fine. The first one made an offer a little lower than I was looking for, so I said I would get back to him as I had another viewing. The guy from the Facebook pulled up in a blacked out Range Rover and 3 other guys got out. I opened the car, explained why I was selling it, and you know when you just get a bad feeling? I wasn't sure why 4 people would come and view an 8-year-old car. He asked me if he could take the car for a drive. At this point, I was not going to get into the car with him and said, "Yeah, take it. I'll wait here with your friends." He asked me to get into the car. What if he took it? I said, well, it wouldn't matter. What's insurance for? I was not getting in the car with him. The 3 guys left and didn't speak to me, just themselves, and I couldn't understand, but they made me feel very unsure if the car would come back. The car was not worth putting up a fight for or arguing over. I was questioning my life choices when he pulled it back up. He got out and offered me the same as the other guy earlier, buying the car for his daughter. He wanted me to get into the car with him to go collect the cash, and I said I was fine and that his friends could take him if he needed to go, but that I had another viewing and would contact him later. I didn't want to walk back to my house, as I had now decided to sell it to the other guy, as they were just giving me the creeps. He then offered me more than the car was worth if I went with him now. I said no, locked the car, and started walking towards the main street, as if I'd seen my neighbour walking down, and shouted to him and his dog. They spoke to each other and drove off. I texted the other guy and told him the car was his, and that he was welcome to come any time to get it. He sort of filled out the V5 and went. That night, from my living room, the black Range Rover came back and parked outside. I live in a cul-de-sac, so I am set back to where we had been. I told my husband, and he looked and said it was strange, and then my phone started blowing up. I politely said the car had gone, and that I was sorry but I couldn't help. The car drove off, and came back 30 minutes later. It happened about 3 times that night. It was strange, but I thought nothing more of it, as the next few days nothing happened. On the Friday 4 days later, I finished work early and got back to get the dog ready to go out. We were going to head straight back to the park and run like the wind. As I get to the end of the cul-de-sac, the same car pulled up, and one of the guys jumped out and said hello. I held the lead tighter, and my dog was thoroughly unimpressed, and she gave a bit of a grumble, and he asked if he could pet her. I said no, she's a guard dog and doesn't like to be touched, and we went on to walk. He then grabbed my arm, and the dog latched into his forearm. Cue his screaming, and there was only one other guy in the car with him, and he jumped out and started shouting. This dog is the most placid and loving dog you've ever seen, and to be honest, it was a warning nip, as if she had meant to really hurt him, she would have gone through the bone. His friend was shouting and pulling him away. I called her back, and got her to sit as a few neighbours came out as they went towards the car. I haven't seen the car since, but honestly, I wouldn't sell something that meant someone had to come to my home online again. So stranger who clearly wasn't interested in the car, let's not meet again. Here is a short history of how this all began. When I was about 16, my mother told me a friend of hers needed a babysitter, and I was more than willing to take the job because I could always use the extra cash. I have a very close relationship with my mother, so I had complete trust in this friend of hers, since my mother doesn't trust just anyone. So I began to babysit for her 10 and 7-year-old daughters. The oldest had a major attitude, but after I became their regular sitter, she wasn't as difficult to deal with. If you're curious as to why I'm sharing this, it's a vital detail to the story. Let's fast forward several years. I am about 19 at this point. I know this because I had graduated high school the year before, and this was a major deal in my life. So it's all very vivid in my mind. I hadn't babysat for this family for about 2 years by now. I was pretty busy after going to college, working my part-time job, and spending spare time with family and close friends. One day, my mother approaches me and asks if I would be willing to befriend a girl that her parents felt needed socialization. She gave me a few details before I decided on what to do. She told me that the girl that she wants me to befriend was one of the girls that I used to sit for. I asked her who she was referring to because I sat for several families when I was a full-time sitter. She told me who it was, and I was slightly hesitant because of the attitude she had when I first met her, but I was always open to helping other people in any way I could. I began to get together with her every once in a while. I would invite her to small gatherings of some of my other friends, but only if there were other younger ones with us, like their little sisters or something. I was always in groups of people of various ages, usually around the age of 13 plus, and always with both guys and girls. My older friends and I were sort of the big sisters of the group, so that's why we were always happy to have those types of get-togethers. She slowly opened up to me. She began to share with me that she was dealing with depression and often felt that she was unloved by her family and friends. She also told me that she had contemplated suicide and was cutting herself. Well, the reason I took to her more than the other younger ones is because I had dealt with those same exact thoughts and feelings when I was around her age. So I wanted to do my best to give her a listening ear and a shoulder to lean on. I would give her some advice, anything that I thought would benefit her. Once she felt she could trust me, I tried to broaden her horizons, but things would slowly take a strange and eventually sinister turn. Now, when I would try and invite her to our usual get-togethers or social events, she seemed a little standoffish. I was a little surprised, but not too much, because I knew how difficult things were for her, and it did take her some time to warm up to people. Eventually, she began to try and drag me along with her when she had one of her "I don't want to be here" attitudes. For example, we would go to the house of another friend of mine. There would be maybe 6 to 8 of us in total, and we would watch movies or do something else. This was before the days of social media and the everyone has a cell phone era. She seemed to want to go, but as soon as we got to wherever it was we were, she wanted to leave. She would pull me aside and say, "I don't want to be here. Let's go." Well, I at first was kind and tell her, "Come on, let's just stay for a little while, and if you still don't want to stay, we'll leave." I soon learned that she didn't want to stay even if we were all having a great time. Eventually, she kept pulling me aside whenever we were in a group setting, so I just eventually stopped inviting her altogether, because all she wanted to do was leave, no matter what the circumstances were. I mention this because it's another vital part to the story. I would spend time with her once in a while, just her and I. and she began to call me on a daily basis. It started with 2 or 3 times a day, and eventually racked up to 7 to 10 times every single day. As I said before, this time in my life I was always extremely busy, so I wasn't always home. I had my own telephone landline because I was able to pay for it myself, and I had an answering machine. Not voicemail because I was too cheap to pay for a feature I didn't need. Anyway, I would have to change the tapes way too often because of how much she would call me and leave message after message. She would leave messages like, "Where are you? Why aren't you answering my phone calls? Who are you with?" That was just a little too weird for me. Even when I told her that I wasn't always home until late in the evening or nighttime, and all she had to do was leave one message. As soon as I was home, I'd return the message that I had for the day. That didn't deter her from continuing to do this day after day. I began to get really annoyed, but stupid me didn't listen to my gut instincts. I kept telling myself, she just needs a friend. It's not her fault. Boy, would I soon learn that that was not the case. Eventually, I kind of drifted away from her for a bit. Not intentionally, just because things in life seemed to speed up, and I was even busier than before. I would have very few times that I could get together with a friend or two, possibly going out to eat, shopping at a mall, or perhaps seeing a movie. And out of nowhere, she began to show up wherever I was. And no, I didn't tell her where I was going to or who I was with. Like I said, I had pretty much drifted away from spending time with her. We lived in a pretty big suburb, so it's not like it would have been easy for her to know where to find me. I began to get really creeped out, because I thought it was way too coincidental that she was everywhere I was, and would be doing anything recreational. She even found out where I worked, and which college I was going to, something that I had never told her. She was obviously not college age, so why was she at my college campus with her mother? She wasn't even in high school yet. This isn't even the creepiest part. And oh yes, there's more to the story. When I was on break from college, I had the time to spend with family and close friends. I did get together with her a couple of times, still not listening to the creep meter I had going off. I was so stupid. While things took an even more weird and unexplainable turn. She would ask to spend the night, and I didn't really do sleepovers anymore since I was of age and pretty much leading my own life, but she was still a young one, so I would invite her once in a while to stay over. Somehow I have no memory of how this happened, but she wouldn't leave. It's like she slept over one night and then just never left. Trust me, there was definitely not an open invitation for her to stay long term. I had told her that she couldn't stay with me because she had her own life and so did I, and she got very angry with me, and for several days refused to leave. Thankfully, I was still living at home with Mum and Dad, and they had to step in and pretty much tell her to bluntly get out. She had a little temper tantrum, but that night did end up leaving. By this time I had been fed up with her irrational and erratic behavior, and I was avoiding her like the plague. I didn't call her back. If she was somewhere I was, I would duck into hiding, so to speak, and tried to lose her in the crowd. That didn't stop her from increasing her strange behavior. Her family even did some things that I felt helped her stalk me more. Now this is not something I am making up. This actually happened. She moved to a street around the corner from where I lived. Now, that's not the scary part. Her and her family moved into a house, which from her living room window, she could see directly into our backyard. And from there, You could see the window to my bedroom. Yes, that happened. I only know this because I found out where she had moved, and my mother was still friends with her mother. So I remember going over there once when she wasn't coming home, and when I looked out of their living room window, I could see our house, my bedroom window, from our backyard. We had a chain link fence, so you could see everything. I got the chills when I saw that. When we got home, I informed my mum, who was so busy socializing that she didn't even notice. That's when my mother tried to talk to her mother and tell her about the situation. Her parents both just ignored my mother's warning, and my mother tried to ask them to talk to her about backing off. Well, that didn't happen. Things just escalated from there. Her mother even tried to convince me to stay friends with her, and just pretty much wanted to pawn off her daughter on me. I don't even remember what she said to try and convince me. I just remember saying to myself, "Okay, lady, you're just as nuts as your daughter." It wasn't before long that the most sinister and disturbing part happened, and this was the last straw. I was home alone one day. She was still living in the Stalker house, so this had to be how she knew I was the only one home. I wasn't talking to her. I had even changed my phone number and told my friends to absolutely not give it to her, to which they respected and happily obliged. Anyway, as I said, I was home alone. It was maybe 10 a.m. and I was just getting up, ready to take a shower and start my day. As soon as I got out of the shower, I hear the doorbell ring. I think nothing of it and go to answer the door. I always look through the peephole before answering, something I still do to this day, and I see several police officers standing there. I get a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, thinking something had happened to one of my family members. I answer the door, and they ask me, "Are you Betty?" I answered, "No, she doesn't live here." And then the officer asks, "Do you have any identification with you?" Which I answered, "Of course, but it's in the back of the house. I'll have to go get it." Now mind you, I am totally confused as to why they're at my door and why they're asking for my ID. The officer then proceeds to tell me that he has to come with me when I go to the back of the house. I just nod in agreement, but am still confused as to what's going on. So we go into my bedroom, I grab the ID, and I show the officer who I am. He just says, "Okay, thank you. May we sit down for a moment and talk to you?" I of course agreed, and motioned him back into the living room, where the other officer had joined us. We sit down, and they tell me that they received an anonymous phone call, that there was a young lady that lived at my address by the name of Betty, that was extremely suicidal and may have already taken her life. I just sat there for a moment in complete shock. I told them that she used to be a friend of mine, but that I hadn't talked to her in quite a while, and that she absolutely did not live there. They asked me if I had any contact information for where she was. Thankfully, I still had her info on hand. I then gave them her contact info, telephone number, and home address. They thanked me for my time and left. I thought that was the end of it, but not by a long shot. After they leave, I call my mother immediately, and she proceeded to tell me to come to her workplace until I had to go to classes for the day. I hightailed it out and drove to her office. Since she owned the business, it was no problem for me to stay there for a few hours. I stayed until I had to go to class, and then went on for the rest of my day, albeit shaken up a bit. The rest of the story is from a third-party perspective. All of my close friends knew about the situation by this time, because her behavior was way too psychotic for me, and I was doing whatever I needed to in order to be safe. I believe a few friends of mine and myself were at a coffee shop, one of the internet cafes from back in the day, and we're talking when another mutual friend walks in and comes right up to us, looks at me and says, "I have something to tell you." I was like, "Okay, shoot." Apparently a few days before, they had run into Betty, and they said she looked eerily exactly like me. My jaw dropped and I asked, "What do you mean?" We in no way looked similar, in any way, shape or form. I mean, it wasn't like you could confuse either one of us. She had apparently begun to dress very much like me, dyed and styled her hair like mine, and wore the same kind of bracelets I would wear. I had a big thing for friendship bracelets back then, and just looked exactly like me. I was shocked to my very core. I had been on the phone with a couple of other friends of mine. I had the three-way calling feature, where you could call two people at once and all talk to one another. One of the friends on the line had informed me that they had heard about why the suicidal report incident occurred. Mind you, this was a few months after the fact. That she had heard from another reliable and trustworthy friend of ours that the reason there was a call, now this is going to blow your mind, is because Betty had called anonymously, saying that a young lady by that name lived at my house and was suicidal. That's not the craziest part. The reason she did it is because she wanted the police to think I was her. She gave the police my physical description, and this was before she started looking like me. So they would take me away to a psychiatric ward, and therefore she could take over my life. How super crazy could she be? I don't know how she thought that my family and friends would allow her to do that, but this is how mentally unstable she was. Now the timing for me was perfect, and life had taken me in that direction. My family was moving away with me for obvious reasons, so we did in fact move away. It was the best thing to ever happen to me, because she just got worse and worse over time. She began to harass my closest friends, trying to get my whereabouts, like my address, phone number, and where I had moved away to. They didn't give her my information, since they knew how psychotic she was. At one point she even began to stalk the brother of one of my very close friends, just so she could try to intimidate him to tell her where I was. He had to have his grandparents step in, because he wasn't of age yet. I have no idea what happened to that situation from there, since I had moved away, and the internet wasn't like it was today. Now let's fast forward to 2012. Mind you, this stalking began around the year 2000. Obviously, since it's 2012, social media is a big thing, and of course I had Facebook. I didn't even think of my privacy, because all of that was long behind me, and I had eventually forgotten about Betty. One day I go to sign on, and take a wild guess who tried to friend me. My heart sank for a second. There was a long pause, and the first thing I did was delete her request and block her fast, thinking I had taken care of the eerie online encounter. But I was wrong again. She began to have her friends message me, asking why I didn't accept her request, why did I block her, and the like. I blocked each and every person that contacted me, until the messages just eventually stopped. Not quite to the end though yet. The last run-in I had with her online was when she tried to contact me through every single social media account I had. Twitter, Instagram, and I blocked her on everything, of course. She then proceeds to try and make fake accounts using my photo and name. And I thought, okay, little Miss Crazy. As you must know by now, I am more assertive and didn't take any kind of craziness from everyone. I had all the fake accounts closed by reporting them to all the social media outlets, but not before getting as much information as I could, reporting her to the proper authorities, and thankfully I had documented everything that happened in the past, and kept it all stored away. What can I say? I'm a pack rat. Once I got the reports out, the contact stopped. I also changed my name that I used on social media. Instead of using my legal name, I used an alias instead. This is the one thing she does not know about me. No one except my immediate family knows this little fact. I also put everything on super private and have set up some super high security measures. Now, one final update. On May 2016, I turn on my phone like I do every morning, and after my phone loads up it says no service. I knew there had to be a mistake as I just paid my bill to the phone company. I asked them why my phone had no service. They looked on their system and proceeded to tell me that in their notes, they received a phone call a few hours earlier that morning from a young lady. They assumed it was me, I guess, and she had just said that she had a new phone and that the number needed to be transferred to this new phone. When they told her that the name didn't match on the account, somehow, and I have no idea how, she got them to change the name on my account from my name to hers. I have no idea what she wanted to accomplish by doing this, and even worse, how the hell she got my number. I explained that this person was a long-time stalker, and that I had reports to the police, and that I have to be protected against her because she is capable of anything. So they asked me to go into their corporate office so that they could change everything back to its original state, as well as putting in some security measures on the account so that it would never happen again. Now since then, thus far, I haven't had any more incidents. I am absolutely on high alert, because if she is willing to wait 16 years and still wants to find me, for whatever reason, there's no way in hell I'll let my guard down. The only reason I didn't file a restraining order is because as far as I know, she does not know where I live, and I want to keep it that way. However, if she thinks that I won't file one if she does find me, she's got another thing coming. So Betty, let's never meet again. I was 13 to 14 years old at the time, and living in northeast Portland, Oregon, in a small apartment, on a pretty well-known and well-travelled road. I was living with my mum, dad, and little sister at the time. My room was at the back side of the apartment, with my bedroom window facing out to the neighbour's yard. There was a fence around their backyard, and probably 8 to 10 feet between my window and that fence. At the time, I was absolutely obsessed with playing Xbox. I'd come home from school and almost immediately hop on a game with some friends. I used a Turtle Beach headset from time to time, so I couldn't hear much outside of the game I was playing. So while I'm sitting there playing something around 10 PM, probably Halo Reach, my dog Clara starts growling next to me. She was the absolute sweetest dog in the world and was also very timid, and she never growled or barked. I figured she must have heard a squirrel running along the fence, because that was often the case. However, she continued to growl and began yelping intermittently. So I go over to my window and look outside. I don't see anything at all, so even though I'm fairly spooked, I chalked it up to her hearing a small animal outside or growling at nothing. About 15 minutes later, I casually look up at my window and see a man's face pressed up against it. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I screamed loudly for my dad, who promptly rushed into the room asking what was wrong. The dude took off, presumably heading towards the street, and I told my dad what I had seen. He rushes out into the living room and through the door. I go outside a minute or so later, but neither of us see any evidence of any other person outside. I was pretty shaken up and didn't get a good look at the guy because it was so dark. I didn't get to sleep that night and spent the rest of the night in my sister's room. What kind of creep watches a 14-year-old girl in her own room? Let's never meet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you again to all my very generous patrons. Your help really does mean the world to me and keep everything running here over at Mortis Media. So if you want your name here at the end credits, you can see the information in the description regarding Patreon. It's basically a monthly subscription just to chip in to Mortis Media every month. But yeah, it's up to you. You can find the info in the description if you really want it. So yeah, sorry for not posting yesterday. I just thought I'd give you guys some time to catch up, as the day before's video was really long, like an hour and a half nearly. And yeah, just give you some catch-up time, reflect, see who you liked. If you wanted to vote for someone, voting's still open, so get your votes in. And we should be back with the regular programming from here on out. We've got an exciting month for you. I'm going to be putting out some polls soon. And if you attended my live stream earlier today, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. It is always fun to do live streams. Oh, and the book that we're writing together, I think you can now vote for it, or very soon. So if you listened, you'll be able to check it out. If you didn't listen, if you missed it, I'll leave a link in the secret message section as well, so that you can check that out too. So thank you everyone for sticking around. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. It always helps me out a bunch. And if you're new here and have actually listened to me ramble this long, well done. Don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon to receive your nightly spooks. They should come out at pretty much the same time every night. If there's a story that you'd like to share, feel free to send it to my Reddit or my email, all of which you can find in the description too. But anyway, for now guys, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.